Well, good morning. Obviously, things are a little different this morning, and I haven't been able to do the Bible study the last couple weeks just because of vacation and some other things. And then this week, Karen had a doctor's appointment, so a little hard to keep up with all the things that we're hoping to be able to do. But I still wanted to have something for this morning, so I'm at home. You're gonna hear some of the sounds of kids doing school in the background, and me and this little guy are chilling this morning. Our text that we would be looking at is Matthew 22 22, looking at verses 15 through like 22, something like that. But as I was doing some research on that, trying to figure out what I was going to say, I came across a video that says what I would have said way better. In fact, not what I would have said, because I wouldn't have known to even look for some of these things. But I was over at 1517.org. I don't know if you've gone there, but I would encourage you to go and check those guys out. They got some fantastic resources over there. And so if you haven't been there, I'd check the podcasts and articles. It's fantastic. And they actually have a like convention. They're going to be doing some streaming coming up. The digital audio, what am I saying? A digital like convention is streamed speaking and that kind of stuff this weekend. So I would encourage you to sign up for that if that's something you want. But Chad Bird is one of the guys over there, and he just does a fantastic job with so many things. And he really broke down these passages in a way that I thought was just absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to play his video, and then we can talk a little bit about it afterwards. But good morning. And here is Chad Bird breaking down Matthew 22, verses 15 and following for us.
Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Almost everyone has heard this famous saying of Jesus, right? Even those who really don't know much about the Bible. Render unto Caesar. Well, this comes in a context where there's a whole debate and discussion about paying taxes. Always one of our favorite subjects, right? So, let's jump into this particular story. It's from Matthew 22. It's verses 15 and following. And we're going to enter this particular story with the perspective of a first century Jew. It becomes extremely important that we view the context, the particular kind of debate that's going on from what's called a halakhic perspective. So the halakha is the Jewish word for the whole legal framework of biblical interpretation. And that is what is going to be behind this particular debate and discussion that Jesus has. And by looking at it from that perspective, we're going to see that when Jesus responds the way he does and says, give to God the things that are God's, he's actually alluding to a couple of passages in the Torah. It's very easy to miss, and so we need to spend some time looking at kind of what's going on behind the scenes in this particular dialogue that Jesus has with his opponents. So, Matthew 15, verses 22 and following. Now, the first thing I need to point out is that this whole section begins a part of Matthew where you could sort of call it the stump the professor part of the gospel, because Jesus gets asked a series of questions in a row that are not really questions. They're not looking for information. They're really designed to entangle him, to trap him in his words. The first of these is in our story. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? The second of these is this outlandish story where they say there was a woman married to 7 brothers in a row, and each one of them died. She married the next brother. He died. She married the next. Well, they get to heaven, and whose wife is she going to be? Because she was married to all these brothers. That's the second question. Third question. Jesus, what's the greatest commandment in the law? Then, as if tired of all these questions, Jesus turns the tables on them, and he asks a question of his own. He says, the Messiah, whose son is he? And, of course, he baffled them so much they were afraid to ask him any more questions. But that's how this whole chapter is going to flow. Question, response. Question, response. So, let's get to the first of these questions, or at least to the context of it. This is how it begins, Matthew 22, verse 15. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. The Greek verb, by the way, for entangle is pagaduo. It means to lay a snare or a trap. So they're trying to snare him in his words. and they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. Okay, so evidently the Pharisees have disciples as well, right? Jesus has his disciples and he sends them, he apostellos them in Greek, same verb that's used here. The Pharisees have their disciples and they apostello them. They send these disciples to Jesus. So we have kind of a contrast that's set up here. But they're not alone. They come with a group that we really, to be honest with you, don't know hardly anything about. They're called the Herodians. Now you could probably guess from the name that they are connected with Herod. So the Herodians were most likely a political party, a political faction that were supportive of Herod, specifically Herod Antipas, who was the tetrarch from the region that Jesus was from, up in Galilee. And he was also at times in Jerusalem, as he is during Passion Week, during Holy Week. So the Herodians come with the disciples of the Pharisees, and they're seeking to ensnare or to entrap Jesus in his words. Now, anytime that someone is seeking to do that, you know two things about them immediately. Number one, they have no true evidence to use against their opponent. Otherwise, they would bring that forward, right? Secondly, they're not interested in the truth. All they're interested in is trapping someone. So they're coming from a false motive, and they're coming with no real evidence against the person that they are trying to trap. Okay, let's go on. Next verse. They said, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you don't care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances." That latter half of the verse, by the way, literally in Greek, is "you do not see the face of men." So "you're not swayed by appearances" would be literally in Greek, "you do not see the face of men." Probably just means that you are blind to anything that might influence your particular decision making. You are an impartial judge, in other words. Now, of course, this is empty flattery. We all know that, right? They're coming from false motives. They're seeking to ensnare him. So there's not a single word of this kind of greasy, oily compliment flattery that they give that is actually spoken from sincerity. However, it is important. It might be spoken from flattery, but what they say is true, right? He is a teacher. I mean, he is truthful, and he certainly is one who follows the way of God. Now, what is important here? This is kind of our introduction to this discussion of halakha. The way of God in Hebrew would be the Derek Elohim. In Hebrew, throughout the Old Testament, Derek not only means a way or a road, a literal way or road, but it also refers to like the way of God, the path of God, the way that he would have you walk in accordance with his will, okay? Now, what do you do when you walk? In Hebrew, you halak. So you halak, you walk on the derek. Now, walking, halak, became a way of Jews to describe living, walking in a way that is in accordance with God's will. And that is called the halakha. So from halak, walking, halakha. So the halakha is a description, a legal description of what it means to be a pious Jew in conformity with the will of God as is expressed especially in the Torah. The reason I stress this is because what is about to be asked Jesus is a halakhic question, a legal question. And the response to a legal question, a halakhic question, is most of the time going to be a legal response that is drawn from the Torah, that's drawn from the 5 books of Moses. Now, I'll explain more as to why this is all important when I get to the allusion that Jesus makes, but I'm kind of setting it up here. This is a legal question, a halakhic question that's being asked that is going to require a halakhic, a legal, a Torah response. Okay? So, what is the question? Here it is. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Taxes. I don't like paying taxes. I would guess you don't like paying taxes. Most people don't like paying taxes, but it's just the reality of being a citizen in whatever country you happen to live in. It was no different for the Jews. Well, it was a little different because they had to pay, first of all, a religious tax. Because they were Jews, they had to help keep the whole commerce of the temple going. And so there was an annual temple tax that they had to pay, which was a half shekel. But on top of that, if they brought sacrifices, part of the sacrifice was really basically a tax that was given to the temple or to the priesthood. And there were tithes that they had to pay to help upkeep this vast network of Levites and priests. So there were lots of religious taxes that Jews had to pay, but not just religious taxes. They also had to pay what we would think of as usual taxes, right? Governmental taxes. And they weren't paying these to people they liked. They were paying them to the Romans. It would be like us having to pay tax to some foreign power. The Romans were subjugating the land of Judea. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And a lot of the Jews, of course, were opposed to the Romans. So you can imagine how difficult it was for them to hand over their taxes, knowing that it was going to the people that they despised, that were taking away their freedoms. So what were these taxes? Well, that is actually a vast question as to how in Judea taxes were collected and what kind of taxes were levied. If you're interested, you can wade into that whole swamp of scholarly literature. Let me just kind of summarize the majority opinion. There were probably poll taxes. A poll tax is a head tax, a tax that's levied upon each individual who's liable to be taxed. It's a set sum. And then there were probably taxes upon like agricultural produce. So you give a portion of your wheat or a portion of your wine to the government. And then thirdly, there were probably also taxes upon property. So how would these have been levied? Well, sometimes you would actually, like I said, give part of your produce, but then sometimes it would be in coinage. You would maybe sell part of your wheat or your wine and then turn that into coins and give that as part of your tax. Well, as we'll see from what's about to happen, Jesus is going to focus on the coins. All right. So is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Now keep in mind that the Herodians, the pro-Romans, would have been expecting or hoping that Jesus would say no. Because if Jesus said no, then they would be able to use that against him. They would be able to claim that he was inciting rebellion against Rome and against Caesar, right? But if Jesus said yes, they would be able to use that against him as well, because they'd be able to try and turn against him the people who were anti-Rome, the people who were like rah-rah for the freedom fighters of Israel, right? So either way, they've got Jesus. If he says, no, it's not right to pay taxes to Caesar, then they can claim he is inciting rebellion against Rome. And if he says, yes, it's okay to pay taxes to Caesar, then they can say to all these people who don't like Rome, hey, your teacher is no longer on your side on this particular issue. So they think that they have Jesus trapped. Well, think again. Next verse. Jesus, aware of their malice, said, why do you put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Now, first of all, this reference to hypocrites in chapter 22, this is going to be a segue into chapter 23. And chapter 23 is when Jesus goes go like full frontal assault on the Pharisees, where you have all this series of woe upon you, scribes and Pharisees, woe, 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 one out after the other. So this reference to them as hypocrites is kind of a lead in to what we're going to encounter in chapter 23. So they're hypocrites. Now, what does Jesus, how does he respond to them? Well, he probably throws them off first, because he asks for a coin, and they're probably thinking, what do you want a coin for? So they bring him a denarius. Now, a denarius, we've talked about that in a couple of other videos. This was what you got paid for a day's labor on the farm, for instance, right? So a denarius would have had an image and an inscription. Now, in this particular case, the image would have been of Tiberius Caesar. Tiberius was the Roman emperor from AD 14 to AD 37, so during the lifetime of Jesus. So his image would have been on the coin, and his inscription would have been there too. Basically, it would have said something like Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus, right? So I'll find a picture and I'll put that up so that you can kind of see what these would have looked like. The inscription and then the image. So Jesus says, whose is this image and whose is this inscription? And they say Caesar. So Jesus says, well, then give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God's. Now, it's easy to understand the first part of that, right? Well, okay. So this coin, it's got the image and inscription of Caesar on there. So give that coin to him. But what about this to God the things that are God's. What is he talking about? Again, remember, this is a halakhic question. This is a legal question. So to respond to that, Jesus would have needed some sort of legal foundation, some kind of legal verse, a verse from the law, a verse from the writings of Moses. What does he go to? Well, it's obvious in the image part, right? So if he's just talked about the image of Caesar, then there's also an allusion to another image. Well, you think image in the law, and what do you think of? Of course, you think of Genesis 1, right? God creates Adam and Eve in his image and likeness. Now, pause there just for a second. Think about what Jesus is saying. So this little coin, it's got the image of Tiberius Caesar on there. Give that to him. But who has the image of God? We do, in our entirety. God has all of us. We bear his image. We bear his likeness. And so in our entirety, heart, mind, body, soul, it's all his. Caesar gets his little bitty coin. God gets all of us, all that we are created to be as human beings. Okay, that's the image. What about the inscription part? This is probably a reference to Exodus chapter 13, verse 9. Exodus 13:9 says, "It shall be to you as a sign on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth." This is talking about the word and the ways of God with Israel. They are bound to their wrist. They are bound to their foreheads. The inscription, the word of God, is bound to the very body of his people. Again, it's the same message. Tiberius has his coin and he has his image and his inscription. Let that be his. But God says, you know what I have? I have you. I have you because I have made you in my image and I have inscribed my words upon you. So you belong to me. I've claimed you as my own. That's how Jesus responds to this legal halakhic question, by going back to Genesis and to Exodus. But it's easy to miss unless you understand that the framework here is a legal framework. It's a legal question, so Jesus is going to give a legal response, a response from the Torah. And so he goes to Genesis and he goes to Exodus and he makes allusions to both of those so that he might let his hearers know that, you know what, you're not asking the right kind of question. The question that he directs them to is, to whom do you belong? Whose image do you bear? Whose inscription is on you? God's image, God's word are on you. And that ought to be our major concern. So that is that's a reading for this coming Sunday. In the end, Jesus says, you know what? God has claimed you as his own. God has claimed you as his image bearer, and he's written his word upon you. And in the broader context of the gospel, that means that we belong to God. In Jesus Christ, we belong to him. We are made to be his children, those who bear his image, those who have his word, those who walk in his ways and follow his paths because of the work of Jesus our Lord. Hope this has been helpful to you. As always, if it has, please share it with your friends so that they can dive into these same readings. And I pray that the Lord's peace may be yours in abundance. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you.
What a fantastic picture of I had never thought of it in that way before, and I just absolutely love that picture. And so, anyway, thank you for joining us this morning. He has been just filling his pants during most of that, so I have a diaper here to change. But man, I just hope that you guys are encouraged, as I have been encouraged by looking at something, a passage that I've always seen in a different light, and just getting to see the grace, see the gospel come through in that passage, how we are bearers of the image of Christ, how he has written his word upon us, how we are his. Just what a wonderful, fantastic thing. Have a great rest of the week, guys, and we'll see you coming up this Sunday. God bless. Take care.